Hi, Mark. How's it going?
It's going ready for another race.
Oh, yeah. I can't believe it's race week already. It feels like the last one only just finished.
It did, and yet it feels like we didn't have a whole lot of racing, no? So you're kind of left a little bit wanting for stuff to happen.
I am looking forward to Bahrain. I never thought I'd say that, but the Bahrain
I mean,
Grand
we say
Prix,
that every year, but
yeah, that's true. But just the configuration of the track with these giant cars might actually be much more interesting. It has been for the last few seasons. So yeah, Bahrain, bring it on. Can't wait. Let's go. But in the meantime, Amar, couple of things to chat about before we get into the race week proper, the race weekend proper. The first one is Ferrari, your team. You don't even have your
no.
car like sitting above your head. You're just so ashamed of how they're performing at the beginning of the season. It seems you've jettisoned all Ferrari gear. What's going on?
I mean, I say this every year. I hate them, and I love them so much that they make me hate them so quickly. And you're right, Jez. I mean, look, this is arguably the worst start Ferrari has had since 2009, when they made a massive blunder in interpreting a new formula set, right? So if you kind of remove the sprint race result of Hamilton, which you could probably argue was a little bit of a an odd one in terms of being able to kind of do that given Ferrari's first three races. They would be, they would be really nowhere, and they kind of are nowhere right now. If you look at the point standings, they're closer to Williams than they are to their other competitors, and McLaren are running away with it. So this is certainly not the season start that I had hoped for. I guess on the other hand, Shez, I am just looking at this as a 21 race season for us, and to kind of see what happens. So that's all I have to left for. I know you're laughing, but come on, man.
It's
It's also your team, dude. What
always
happened to all
about the next race, eh? Uh,
that?
Yeah, yeah, Ferrari have sort of flattered to deceive a little bit. They came into the season with right, we're gonna be on it from the start. Let's go. We've built up so much momentum from the end of last season. We were the quickest on the grid, and then they've had this um, slight revolution in terms of the suspension over the winter. A switch up to pull rod front suspension, uh, retaining that uh, push rod at the rear. Um, so there's been a bit of a revolution on the side of the mechanical platform, and yet here we are. They're no further forward. They're actually a bit further back relatively to the teams that they
Yeah.
were hoping to compete with. Um, I guess in seasons gone past, we would have been, there would have just been a case of, okay, come on, Ferrari, just get it together. But there's been a few tidbits that have come out. Specifically, Lewis Hamilton talking about, there's some component that that the team have found. It's not performing quite as well on my car. It's but I think that by the next race, it's all going to be sorted out. What's going on there?
I have no earthly idea what's exactly going on, because what Lewis said left a lot to interpretation, and you can go back and sort of watch his comments post race, and it feels eerily similar just to last year, maybe even the last couple of years, and I think that sort of vindicates a lot of you Mercedes fans, right? Because you guys have been clamoring about how Lewis has sort of been in the media, especially last year when he was, I guess, at points in the season at the peak of his frustration, perhaps in his entire career. And it seems like what Ferrari have done have sort of gone in his path in terms of how they've kind of set up the car. I mean, look, Fred Vasseur said at the beginning of the season, this car is sort of 95% different than last year's car. And I kind of laughed it off at that point. But really, if we given the first three races and Ferrari have no idea how to kind of run their car, run the right ride height, et cetera, that doesn't seem like an outlandish statement anymore. So Shez, I'm a little bit confused as to what it is that they're exactly hoping to accomplish. I do not like the fact that Lewis kind of alluded to that. Really, I mean, because he has had this very positive demeanor for the first three races, saying, I'm just kind of getting embedded with the team. I'm kind of learning how to do stuff. And then he sort of came out at the end of the race in Japan and said, well, I'm losing 3/10 to my teammate because of X. And I know he said something about it. It doesn't really quite make full sense, and I'm just not happy about that. And I don't quite know what they're fixing for Bahrain. I mean, there's talk about a new floor, but then there's also some rumors that it may not happen the next race. And oh, Shez, it's all imploding already.
Yeah, I think imploding is probably a bit too strong. I think if you want to see a proper implosion, go to Milton Keynes. But yeah, I mean, it's a bit concerning, isn't it? And certainly on the surface of it, it sounds very, very 2024. You know, they that immediately gets my back up a little bit. Why is he talking about the team in the third person? It's we. You know, you're supposed to be embedded in the team now, Lewis. You know, they found something on the car that's been underperforming for the past 3 races. I'm hoping that when that's fixed, I'll start to get better results. Those are the words that he used in the pen after the Japanese Grand Prix. And there's a sort of suspicion there, or there's an inference there that it's happening on his car, but not necessarily on Charles. But we also know, as you say, Ammar, that they have diverged quite a bit on setup, both of them. I want to try and get down to the nuts and bolts of this a little bit, if I can. So we know that of the top 4 teams, Ferrari have a mechanical platform that uses anti-dive and anti-squat much less than the teams further up the grid to them. If you want to see how much, Gary Anderson's done a cool little article where he's basically just stuck all of the cars in order and sort of had a little measurement of how much anti-dive and that there is on the front suspension, and whether they're using pull rod or push rod. So Ferrari, we know, are using a pull rod front suspension, and we know that they're not using a lot of anti-dive. Why do you use anti-dive? Well, the idea is that it keeps the platform stable under both braking and acceleration. And we know that these cars especially need a stable platform to be able to have a consistent level of downforce across all speed ranges. It's what Red Bull pioneered at the beginning of this rule set, and it worked to great effect early on. But the problem with it is, you know, the driver doesn't quite get the same feeling. So that feeling of the car diving under braking, the car pitching as it or squatting as it accelerates, when you have the suspension built so it doesn't do that, the driver doesn't feel it so much. So that takes a little bit of it away. And we know that Lewis certainly didn't enjoy that feeling last year. So that should have got a bit better this year. But also there's a little bit of energy dispersion that's a bit of a problem when you have anti-dive and anti-squat. This is something that Alex Brundle brought up in a tweet to us, where if you have very little anti-dive, or the energy that comes from that braking, the energy that would have been dissipated into the especially it's essentially into the suspension arms, now goes to the tire. That heats up your tires a bit more, and then you've lost them by the end of the lap. So taking that out of the equation should have helped. And I don't know about you, but I get the impression, listening to Charles especially, that actually this car is quite easy to exploit. He felt like he got the maximum out of the car over the weekend. It was just slow. And that to me makes me worried about the fact that they've taken that anti-dive and anti-squat out of it. We've talked a lot over the first few races about the difference between making a car drivable and making a car fast. And perhaps Ferrari have come down a little bit too far on that drivability side of the equation. And that's costing them a little bit. There's also been a lot of chat about ride height, that perhaps in China they ran the car too low, and that's why Lewis's plank wore out. And then in Japan they had to raise the ride height a little bit, and that obviously costs you performance. You need these cars to run as low and stiff as possible. So what's going on there? You've done a bit of reading around this, so educate me.
The design philosophy of Ferrari coming into this season has been driven around Lewis Hamilton's style, and they're not finding the right ride height. And so, to your point, right? Ride height is important because again, it's all about stability, but you are compromising speed and sort of performance the higher the car rides. And it seems like between the two races in China, they got it too low, and in Japan, evidently they got it a little too high. And China was a bit of an elixir, right? Because in the sprint, they seem to have nailed the right ride height, if you will, right? Because it was a sprint race, and you only had approximately 40 kilos of fuel compared to about 110, which is sort of in normal race pace. And so I guess it worked out well. But in Japan, they kind of had to lift that again to kind of offset and for it. And of course, Shez, there are a couple other things that play into it. The track conditions themselves. The how abrasive the track is kind of plays a role into it. Track temperature and temperatures in general play a role into it. And so Suzuka was very different than China. Almost the exact opposite in some ways compared to what was in China in that regard. So, Shez, it just feels like again they're doing a little bit of what Ferrari are doing a little bit of what Mercedes were doing at the beginning of last year, which is just kind of tinkering around and seeing, well, is it too high? Is it too low? And then they're trying to get it to the point where it feels the right way for Lewis, because it seems like that is paramount for Lewis to be successful. Whereas as you stay on Charles' side, I think he is kind of on the sort of the Max Verstappen sort of philosophy of driving, where he doesn't mind he doesn't mind the sort of being uncomfortable with sort of not having the kind of stability that it seems Lewis desires, right? And so he's fine with, I guess, a twitchy car, if that's what you want to call it, really. But Lewis does not, and I think Ferrari are already at a crossroads in terms of what sort of philosophy to go around. Because you could argue, Shez, they closed 2024 being, as you said, the quickest car. They were just a few points off the championship, and they kind of came around and changed the car 95%, and they just kind of don't know what they're doing right now. So I think they're getting feedback from Lewis. And then you're seeing with Charles in Japan in particular, he did the best race that he's done yet. And there's nothing, they're just slow. And it's not like they're that much slower than McLaren too. We should just sort of add, by the way, like they're just a few tenths off. So it's not that big of a margin, but they're somehow unable to exploit it. I can't understand what they're doing philosophically more than what they're doing, sort of from a, approaching, setup, etc. kind of standpoint.
It does sound much more like a setup issue though than a fundamental car problem. In that, and maybe the fundamental car mechanical platform, means that they can't find that elusive Goldilocks correct setup. I don't want to put this too much on Lewis, because that platform was created before he got there, before even Loic Serra got there. So it didn't have anything to do with the people that are coming in. That was already locked in from last year in terms of what they were planning to do. But and actually that anti-dive, anti-squat thing, if you look at what Ferrari had on their car last season, that's not changed. They still have less anti-dive on their front suspension last year than their key rivals did. And in fact, teams like Mercedes had that funky adjustable rear upper wishbone thing that allowed them to change the amount of anti-dive they had on their car. Like Ferrari didn't really have that. They seem to be much more keen to allow their drivers to be able to feel the front end of the car, and that's just played into what Lewis wants. So I think that's just a happy coincidence in terms of what he wanted from the car. But there does seem to be this kind of, last year certainly they were really, really good in the low speed corners, and it was, you'll remember, in Barcelona, they introduced that new floor, and suddenly they were getting bouncing again.
Everything.
So they seem to want to keep that low speed performance as much as they can, but the compromises they're having to make to allow the car to perform well in the low speed corners, especially on Lewis's car, because he likes to run the car really low and really stiff, mean that in the high speed corners the plank gets worn away. And if the plank gets worn away, your car's illegal, which is what happened in China.
Yeah.
So the only thing that you can do is what they had to do in Japan, which was raise the ride height again. And it may be that because, as you say, Charlotte doesn't mind too much about about how low and stiff the car is. He's happier to have the car a bit softer, to have the car running a bit higher in the first place anyway, and actually it doesn't affect him quite as much. I don't know, but it's all just hypothesizing. And again, when we come to, okay, what is this big fix going to be? You say it's going to be a flaw. I have no idea. I genuinely have no idea. I haven't heard Lewis in any of his interviews, or that interview, saying it's a flaw issue. Just that it's potentially something to do with the rear end of the car. But again, it's all really vague. But if they have a flaw that allows them to access that setup that gives them really good performance in the low speed, but doesn't push the car down too far in the high speed and wear away the plank, then yeah, maybe that's what happened, and maybe that's what we're going to see in Bahrain.
Just let me ask you this,
and
no, you're fine. And in regards to the ride height, I mean, I'm not technically savvy enough. Perhaps some of our viewers will tell us what that means in terms of perhaps that allows them to run the car lower. I have no earthly idea. Maybe not. But I would just like to kind of go back to the idea, well, this car is sort of being made with Lewis in mind, right? I mean, I know you're right in saying that this was sort of designed, a lot of the philosophy was kind of put in place, I guess, early on last year, right? But by then we knew, A, Lewis was coming, and B, I mean, his guys from Mercedes have come in essence, right? So my question to you is, if Ferrari actually had arguably the quickest car, maybe even the second quickest car at the end of the season, right? Or neck and neck with McLaren, why would you have needed to change that philosophy? Because everything you're saying to me, Shez, about them working with the 2025 car seems to be something that Red Bull did at the start of the rule set. And they've kind of evolved from there. So at best, what you're doing is you're starting, in some ways, 2 years behind, 3 years behind the evolution. And granted, that car was designed by Adrian Newey. So there are many things to them oversimplifying this, but I guess I don't understand the philosophy of that. Like, how could you go from being second quickest, whatever, to just kind of being a little bit of nowhere, really? And I don't know that how you're going to fix this over the course of the next 21 races, because as you say, they have to kind of hit that Goldilocks zone, and it's going to change on every track. And if there are changeable weather conditions, which ironically Suzuka did present, yes, there was no rain, but the track got very cooler rather, compared to what it was on Saturday, on Sunday, right? So I don't understand why you would change the philosophy of the car unless it was to give Lewis his best chance. And evidently they're not still there yet, I guess you could argue.
Well, Fred was pretty clear about this in the off season when he made that 90% rule, and I have to say I never took that to mean they've made a fundamental, complete redesign of the car. What I took that to mean, and certainly what I think a lot of other people in the press took that to mean, was that they've optimized components to change how well they work, as opposed to a fundamental change in the concept of the car. Yes, they've moved to a different front suspension, but their whole USP last year was about making the car more drivable. That's why they took the anti-dive out of the front suspension on the 24 car. It's what Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc were both really happy about towards the end of the season, because they had a car they could exploit. It just happened to have a higher ceiling on it than this car seems to as well. But two things. The first is that the argument from the technical team at Ferrari towards the end of last year, and certainly at the beginning of this year, was that yes, they had a fast car towards the end of last year, but they were running out of ceiling. They'd got to the end of the potential that car had, and therefore they had to come up with a different mechanical platform that allowed them to have a higher ceiling, and perhaps we're just in the foothills of that right now. The second is that they actually haven't gone backwards. Again, Fred sort of talked about the fact that they were 6/10 off of Red Bull at the beginning of last season, and maybe 2 or 3 tenths off of pole position. Now it's just that the field is bunched up so much this season. I mean, you saw that the first 3 in Suzuka qualifying were covered by less than a second. Less than a tenth of a second. So being 2 tenths, 3 tenths off pole in that situation puts you in 4th. If you get all your eggs in a row, that's as good as you're going to get. So it's all sort of relative. Yes, it's a bit worrying, but whether or not they actually come up with a solution, I guess we're going to find out. I'm sounding like a proper Tifosi right now, aren't I? I guess
I'm so proud of you right now.
I guess we're going to find out in the next race or two. And Ammar, this is the thing, isn't it? This is win or bust for Ferrari, because they can't change this mechanical platform mid-season. So the onus is upon them to find a way to make it work. And if they can, brilliant. It'll be great. They may well be up the front of the grid with a car that has a high ceiling, and their drivers can exploit that. That's the perfect blend that you want out of your race car. But it may be that we're sitting here struggling for the rest of the season, doing a Mercedes thing where we're constantly one setup change away from getting this perfect. I don't know.
And then I think the upshot to the Shez is, if they don't find a solution, then they're going to have to be one of the first ones to bail on this year's car and start working on 26 already, because they're not going to get a whole lot in terms of. I know the technical director will probably hurt McLaren, as is sort of rumored to be the case at this point. But the question about all of this is to what degree, right? And I don't know that it would be to the degree where Ferrari would suddenly sort of catch them. Maybe they can, but the question is, can they actually really compete for either championship at that point? The answer, might be, less than 50-50, right? At that point, you kind of have to bail. And then if you do have to bail, Shez, this will be yet another rule set that Ferrari has failed to really show any kind of
they follow the same pattern they always do, which is that they start off really strong, and then either through technical directives or their own sort of loss of direction, they manage to glide path their way down to mediocrity. They do it every rule set without ever actually winning one. It's the fun of being a Ferrari fan, I guess, which I now am. Yes, amazing. All right, let's move on to the next item on our wish list of stuff to talk about. We're going to talk about Haas. We never talk about Haas, but here we are talking about them anyway. You'll understand why in a second. So Haas today put out a statement, which we picked up on Twitter, basically complaining, not just complaining, but imploring the US government, Trump in particular, to roll back the policy that they have on tariffs. I'm just going to read a quote from this, because I found it quite interesting. So Haas Automation is particularly concerned about the potential reduction of tariffs on machine tools from certain countries, such as Japan, Taiwan and Korea, without a corresponding reduction in tariff rates for imported raw materials and components into the US. Such a scenario would be catastrophic to the $5 billion US machine tool industry, which is a key component of US national security. They started that by saying, look, we have had to lay off staff. We're not doing any overtime. We've had to reduce the amount of hours that the factory is open in California, because we might go under. Like, these tariffs are actually going to kill us. And ultimately, if Haas either go under or their shareholders have a look at their activity, the first thing on the chopping block is going to be the Formula One team. As the official spokesperson of the US government on Tired GP, what have you got to say for yourself?
I did not. When we started doing this, Shez, I did not think we were going to get political. And so let me just clarify on the front end, because we live in a day and age where you cannot be critical of anything without really picking a side or kind of being there. So this is not a political discussion or a statement. I know many of you have told us over time you feel a certain way about various things, including DEI, women in sports, et cetera, et cetera. This has nothing to do with that. Absolutely nothing. We did not pick this up on our own. This was something that a Formula One team put in there. And Shez, the only thing I would say is what Haas have put out there is what many other companies in and out of Formula One, mostly out of Formula One, have been saying in many different ways. We've had chief executive officers kind of voice concerns over this. I mean, even Elon Musk has criticized the tariff policy. So, I mean, there are a lot of businesses that are hurting. There is a lot of unemployment happening. Again, I'm a trained economist, so there's a part of me that feels very strongly about this in many ways. And what we're seeing is exactly what I would have predicted, which is, unfortunately, you are going to see a lot of pain. Let's talk about the pain being a short-term thing. Define what short-term means, define what long-term means. And so I think you're right in bringing up Haas as a really good example that all of us in the Formula One community can sort of empathize or understand. And this is particularly troubling, right? If it does not get resolved in any appropriate way. By the way, the damage is kind of already done a little bit. So it's whatever, even if it gets fixed, if that's the right word, the recovery path will be hard. But I mean, this is what we're going to see continuously, Shez. Not just Haas, by the way, even Cadillac will be affected by this, and also Red Bull that are now partnering with Ford, right, starting next year. They're all going to pay the price, and particularly in many different ways. Now, I guess you could argue a company like Red Bull will probably be able to manage that. So and even Ford for that matter, but. The Haas example is very interesting because they're not this huge, gigantic kind of company like the others we're just talking about, right? So they're going to feel the pain right away. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, they could potentially be a Formula One team up for sale. Let you know that. And I think it's not good. And this is, by the way, not going to be good for any of the 3 U.S. Grand Prix that are being run too. And one of which is coming up in just about 3 weeks or so from now in Miami. And there's going to be an impact that Formula One will feel across the board, right, with this. So it's not a good situation. Again, I think that every team is going to kind of look at it. I think there's a question about sponsors as well. So while Haas have put out a statement because they're directly impacted by the tariff policy in the now, I think that you're going to start seeing some effects of all of this. I'm not sure this is what Formula One wants at this stage and where they're at.
Oh man, Ammar, I feel like when I'm chatting to you there, I should have one of those little rolling news bites across the bottom, where they have like the stocks going up and down.
There you go.
Like, that's what we've become. I have to say, it does seem a bit odd. Like I'm not a trained economist, so I literally don't know anything. But it does seem like it's a double whammy for a company like Haas Automation to have their rivals have lower tariffs to be able to sell their goods in the US, and yet for them to be able to make the stuff that they need to make, they have to pay over the odds because the government has increased the tariffs on the raw materials they need to make the stuff they need to make. I don't get it. Just coming back to the F1 team. So I take your point, right? That Haas being an American team, it's going to cause them a problem. But in terms of their actual F1 operation, none of it is really in the United States anymore. Their power unit is built in Italy. Their chassis is built in Italy by Dallara. All of their R&D and wind tunnel time, all of that is done in Maranello. So actually, and on top of that, we know that as a franchise, these Formula One teams are now worth a pretty penny. So actually, if you're looking at Haas Automation as an entity, actually the Formula One team is probably the most high value thing they've got.
Possibly, yeah. And they might have to sell it.
Yeah, just to get the cash to be able to keep the rest of the company running. How ironic is that? But I definitely take your point about Cadillac and GM. Ford less so, because that seems to be just like a badging exercise. Like Ford are just sticking their name on the
No, yeah,
on a powertrain that Red Bull are creating. But certainly for Cadillac and their aspirations for creating a power unit, yeah, it's going to be an absolute nightmare for them. They're planning to build that, I presume, in Detroit. So
yeah. I
how's that
mean,
going to work with a heap of tariffs? And yeah, so where I agree that we on this channel try and separate um, politics from the day-to-day enjoyment of our sport, because actually sometimes I just want to forget about the stuff that's going on in the rest of the world. This is where those two ends start to merge, and if Haas end up coming off the grid, and I can't believe I'm saying this given how we were talking about them last year, get rid of Haas, we were saying, but to have them fall off the grid because of something that has happened on a worldwide level just feels ugh. Like it
it
feels like
does feel.
2008, 2009 all over again. Awful.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine there will be a buyer there, so it won't be all doom and gloom from that regard, right? I think there's that, but I think that we're about to start seeing the effects. Again, I'm saying this and it's sort of knowing what the here and now is, fully recognizing that this is just the here and now. We're recording this on Wednesday, April 9th in the United States, but it could change on April 10th, April 11th, 12th. Who knows what's going to happen? But the reality is that I think that while Haas have kind of put out the statement there, I think Formula One as a sport, because it is a multinational sport, is about to get impacted really, 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 really badly, negatively. As are, by the way, other things that we should not forget, Shez, while we're talking about this. I mean, this is just a sport, right? But there are people's livelihoods that are attached to it. There's a whole ecosystem around it. And look, if tourism is less in terms of people coming to races, particularly when there are 3 races in the United States, that's not going to be good for people. So there are actually people whose livelihoods will be affected. But I think on the Formula One side of things, you could see some sponsorships go away, those kind of things. So that will also be easy things to cut off. Now, there are contracts that are written, there are things that are out there. So hopefully it doesn't get too crazy, so we can kind of get back to racing and not have to worry about this. But it is not nothing, guys, for a Formula One team to put out that statement. It's just not nothing, and it's got. By the way, that statement has got Haas F1 team right there. The logo is there. They didn't have to do that. They didn't have to do that, but they did. So they must really be hurting in order to do that.
But the other question I had was how is this going to affect like the bigger teams? Like, is it gonna cause a problem for teams like Mercedes? A Honda going to have to rethink their whole plan going forwards? I guess not so much because they're not as affected in terms of the tariffs. But yeah, is there going to be a material pain that teams like Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren are going to feel?
Yeah, I think this will probably warrant a little bit of a deeper dive. But look, we live in an interconnected world, Shez, where the United States has been part of every conversation, every supply chain. Whether you look at raw materials all the way up to sort of manufacturing, fabrication, logistics. So I cannot sit here and pinpoint which team will be affected by what, but there's going to be some element of this affecting literally everybody. Maybe you could argue Ferrari is the only sort of team that is so heavily based in Italy that could perhaps, at least on paper, just sort of thinking out loud, that may not be the issue. But I think, again, you're looking for parts everywhere. Like they have so much carbon fiber, right? A lot of this is sort of interconnected and it goes through maybe different places in the world. So I mean, we're all going to get a lesson in some basic sort of fundamental economics and sort of how this works, right? Which I'm partly excited about. I would have hoped that it would happen under different circumstances, but it will affect. And just like I said, I think sponsorships are one of the first things to go, right? If people are companies are rather laying off people, it is also easy to cut back on marketing budgets, advertising budgets, which are huge for a lot of these companies. And so if there's sort of a pullback in general or sort of a defensive mode, then I imagine that's going to happen. But I think by and large, because the sport is based in Europe for the most part, even though the commercial rights holder is in the United States, I think the impact will probably be a little bit less than sort of what other companies are experiencing in this moment. But
Cool,
who
man.
knows?
That's a slightly doom and gloom way to to call time on this episode. But as usual, please like, please subscribe, please leave us a comment. We'll read every single one. We'll reply to as many people as we can. Sorry, Haas. We'll see you guys in the next one.
Later, hopefully.